Hello and welcome back everyone, this is LuckyLoremaster. Alright, here we are with another Company of Heroes 2 replay. This one is going to be U.S. Forces Artillery Doctrine in a 4v4 match. This game I actually had a lot of fun with because I wanted to experiment, because I had the luxury of not having to carry the team. We were gonna do the match, ended up being a face-off at Rostov, another old, one of the old Russian maps, but still lots of fun, and one I had not actually had that much playtime on. It was in winter time, even though in Rostov the blizzards are not that common, they still do happen, so you have to keep that in mind when you start moving around. As you can see, all of the water here is frozen over, so tanks can drive across, however you have to be very careful, because quite a few tanks, not only on our team but theirs, managed to find a nice icy home at the bottom of the river, so you have to be very careful when you're using that as an option. I ended up being the northernmost player on this side of the map, and because all of my allies were Russian, so they would have the heavier armor like the T-34-85 and the IS-2, I figured I can actually play a very different style than what I would normally do, and so I went with the artillery or infantry doctrine, however you'd like to look at it. I kind of feel that they're one and the same. And so I was deciding I was going to play very defensive. I was going to build lots of caches around all the fuel points, and I was just going to try to build up enough of an artillery force that whenever my allies found any kind of decent concentration of German force, I could just instantly just start bombarding it into ruin. That was my #1 goal with this map. Alright, so let's switch to my perspective, show resources, and turn off the fog of war. Okay. So, everyone started out getting doing their normal expansion. Again, the Germans doing much the same. However, I think in this map it was, let's see, yeah, 1 OKW, 1 Wehrmacht, 2 OKW. So 2 OKW and 2 Wehrmacht versus 1 American and 3 Russian units, which it makes for some pretty intense action. As you can see, the whole river frozen over, as I mentioned earlier, but still very dangerous to go driving around out there. Tanks do tend to move faster while they're on the river, but they also tend to slide and lose control of direction, which is actually pretty funny to watch. But, yeah, right at the, as you can see, instead of typically going with the riflemen, I ended up making a lot of rear echelon troopers at first, because I wanted to cap every point, put a fuel catch on every point. I didn't mind being behind the lines. And if you're want to play defensively, the rear echelon troopers are great, because they're only 160 manpower for a 4-man squad. And I think they only take up 4 or 5 cap points. I don't know how many pop cap. It's not much. Not nearly as much as the riflemen, because they're not as effective as combatants. However, if you have them spend a little bit of manpower making a defensive structure, as I do several times on this map, they are absolutely brutal. Alright, so I'm just going to speed it up to ×4 at this point, just because it does kind of take a while for everyone to run to their specific sectors and set up. Meanwhile, the Germans are pretty much taking their whole part of this bank of the river here, setting up lots of their armored trucks and reinforced points pretty close to the lines. They started getting into the victory points quickly. Meanwhile, a lot of our Russian units were moving to take the corner victory point, which is much easier to defend with once you manage to capture it. As you can see, there is one fuel point over here, which is everybody's hot topic. Everyone usually ends up fighting over that side of the bridge. However, the Germans were the ones to get there first. And they were forced to get to this central island as well. So, I was just spending all of my manpower at this point just building fuel caches everywhere I could find them. Fuel caches, yeah. And so then I started putting up fighting positions. And they're very good, because once the rear echelon troopers are inside them, they will shoot rifle grenades, which are very effective against infantry and light vehicles. And you can also upgrade the fighting position with the direction it's facing, at a roughly 90-degree angle, 45 degrees in each direction, with a 50 caliber machine gun, which is also very good against infantry and light vehicles. So it's an excellent, excellent thing to set up if you're going to play defensively, like I do on these larger maps, because pretty much my objective at this point was just get my team as many resources as possible, hold the important positions defensively with you know, the industrious use of troops, and negate the innate I guess you could say, firepower superiority of the German forces by using the defensive structures to do that, complete with their heavy machine guns and rifle grenades and everything else. As you can see here, he started using some Stern Pioneers to put up heavy pressure on us. That is something that some OKW players will do, because they're very effective versus infantry. So, kind of using his engineer force to bully us back a little bit. Meanwhile, they had set up pretty decent defenses in the center. Nothing too formal, though. I was just waiting in order to have the manpower to call up the heavy artillery, because that's what it was going to be all about. Meanwhile, my ally had set up lots of defenses at our corner victory point, and it was essentially right now a game of back and forth, with them using machine guns to defend that field point, and us kind of poking and prodding away at the center to see just how much of a force they had built up and just what they were trying to do. I, meanwhile, was working on making my captain and trying to dislocate the enemy infantry. My teammates had actually brought up some machine guns that they had actually stolen from the Germans by the looks of it. Oh, no, that's a Maxim. Okay, so they had brought up their own machine gun squads to clear them off. And I was building more fighting positions in the rear sector. It's good to multi-lap these things if you're playing this way, so that if they try to rush one fighting position, and the infantry get close, start throwing grenades, they come under fire from another fighting position, which is a great way to handle it when the enemy starts trying to throw in these kinds of assaults. But as you can see here, they've already put up barbed wire here with his engineers. He was just trying to keep our infantry out of there. I was not really concerned with taking that right now. I was just wanting to help keep my allies reinforced in the positions they were trying to set up, and make sure the enemy couldn't really encroach into our territory in any meaningful way. And one of the interesting things that the artillery doctrine gets is the M21 Mortar half-track, which is very handy. It's just as it says on the tin. It's a mortar and in a half-track, and they go around, and they're pretty good against static infantry, which, hey, what does he seem to be using a lot of here? A lot of static infantry in one position. So I ended up calling, I think, one or two of those in. Another neat thing you get with the artillery and infantry doctrine is our riflemen have the ability to build their own fighting positions, and sandbags and lines, and of course also plant mines as well, so they kind of take some of the engineering capabilities from the rear echelon troops. However, they do not gain the repair ability, because I think probably Relic determined that was just too strong, considering what it pretty much made capable. As you can see here, I was busily trying to upgrade this fighting position and use it to just kind of whittle away at the bunkers that he was trying to build and upgrade with machine guns. And I was also bringing my captain forward, because the bazooka is also good at weathering down these targets. And I started bringing in the anti-tank guns, because I figured if there's two OKW players, you know, they're going to deploy some frickin' tanks. I mean, it's a given, you know. It's very rare to find a German player that just focuses on infantry and light armor, rather than, you know, the proper medium and heavy tanks of fame. Right now, at this point, I was just trying to wear down the bunkers. However, he had deployed quite a few Stern Pioneers over here, as well as some Volksgrenadiers, so it actually became a bit of a problem. Again, the 50 caliber, chewing them up, suppressing them, throwing out the rifle grenades, inflicting quite a few casualties. I had actually brought up my lieutenant as well. We were not trying, I'd say, to take the point at this point, but to definitely weather them down. They had called in a mortar with some infantry forces in here. Not a mortar, M3, a light scout car. Very effective for dealing with light infantry. Just kind of doing a probing attack, seeing what kind of forces they had in the vicinity, while I was busy working up my own forces in order to bring them in. So I got my M1 anti-tank gun, and I was looking to bring in a 75mm artillery gun, which does come into play a little bit later in the map. I think I'm going to keep this at ×4, because as far as maps go, this battle was fairly much more of a stable line, just because of the nature of the weather and the fact of all the infantry fighting. I mean, it kind of slowed the pace down of the game, especially when there's more players. You risk getting counterattacked by an even stronger force than, you know, one or two players can readily deal with, especially if the enemy tends to ball up their force. But this one I felt we could definitely win. We were initially at a disadvantage, which I figured was really not that surprising. So I started calling up my M1 pack howitzer. This is great. It's basically like the anti-tank gun, you could think of it. I mean, it just has a 6-man squad that just wheels it around, And it's got pretty good range. Definitely better range than the Mortar half-track that I call in a bit later. And I was going to basically use this throughout the map to just kind of rain down artillery whenever they held victory points that I didn't think properly belonged to them. So you can see some of my fighting positions had been badly damaged, but one of the most important things was to get rid of these bunkers with the machine guns. So my ally had not only brought up T-34s in order to do that, but my anti-tank M1 guns had also arrived in order to help out with that. And so we started getting rid of those defenses fairly quickly, which was a priority. Didn't want them being able to secure any kind of a meaningful foothold, like they had done with this fuel point over here, which would prove to be quite a problem for us later. As you can see, the enemy was actually wheeling around with their own infantry support guns, 75mm, trying to do the same thing that we were. Here they actually took some infantry and actually started moving around very wide on the ice, trying to do a flanking operation. Not really sure why they tried to do this. I mean, it would just find it particularly ineffective, considering that there was just so little out here to fight. I'm not really sure what they were trying to do here, especially when they stopped at the ice like this. I suppose they were just trying to get an idea as to how our defenses were, other than, you know, at the kind of inroads in the center with all of the flak emplacements they had made to try to defend their front. Right now, that's what we were concentrating on. They decided to give up the attack, which I felt was maybe a lost opportunity for them. That they wouldn't have been able, with just infantry alone, to actually assault our base, considering all of the machine gun defenses. But they definitely could have come in from this direction and maybe stirred up a bit of chaos. But for one reason or another, they decided not to. Useful for our team, at the very least. Now, sure enough, we had put so many infantry forward at this point, and we're coming up with tanks, that their hold on the center began to weaken greatly, especially as I began to call artillery in from this lovely little pack howitzer I had brought along that was just about to rain down with another salvo. And really, it was just a question of, shall I shoot over here, or shall I shoot over there? That's pretty much what it came down to. And I decided that, based off of how my allies were moving their infantry, that the best bet was probably to try to focus on the center of the map at this time, and just kind of weaken their forces enough that we could grab it, and then attack, not really from the north, but from the south and kind of the southeast at the same time, rather than having to only go through one access point. And so, sure enough, the artillery shells were raining down before they knew it, and we had destroyed their defensive bunkers, and the center was pretty much ours at this point. We had really pressured them very hard, and we were starting to take it back. Meanwhile, our ally was doing a good job of holding the victory point here. They managed to get to that early enough. And I was busily buying upgrades and bringing in mortar half-tracks, any other vehicles I could to really start to weaken the enemy in the center. Now, it was at this point that my ally decided, okay, well, if we take the center, you know, it's a good time to actually try to rush into this island here and really kind of shove our way in. Because they don't actually have any dedicated machine gun support to suppress an infantry rush. So this ends up actually, this attack being somewhat effective, considering that as long as these penal battalions, as long as they're able to close ranks, that flamethrower is going to be devastating. But unfortunately, because they got too extended, they managed to get focus fired by all of these different squads, and they didn't actually manage to do very much during their attack, which was kind of unfortunate. However, they did give plenty of opportunities for my pack howitzer to start shooting at the enemy forces. I knew right where they were and how they were organized, and sure enough, the shells came raining down soon enough, which was much to their chagrin, or at least I'd hope. Let's see, where does the fire come down? Yeah, here's where they started trying to make a counterattack that you get rid of this anti-tank gun. They threw enough grenades that it managed to sink into the ice. Oh, and they actually managed to steal one of the M42 45mm anti-tank guns. Again, not that particularly effective. Him having to be very careful because my pack howitzer is still raining in on down them. They were smart in that they had a half-track there to reinforce their infantry, but we had taken the center point, and my ally was going to great lengths to put up sandbag fighting positions here to make sure that we were going to able to hold on to it no matter what. And my role in the game at this point was basically just to try to weaken the enemy forces. I put the lieutenant squad in this fighting position guarding the central sector. I had the captains held in reserve. We were moving forces around. I had brought the Major up and was using vehicles, let's see, the airplane, the recon plane, to actually fly by and scout over some of these enemy positions. As you can see, this is the problem of putting too many machine guns and too many mortars in one places is, hey, guess what? A T-34 shows up. Oh, gee, we don't really have any effective means to defend against that once they're, like, right in our face. And so I was able to pretty much work them over pretty quickly, which I thought was pretty hilarious and good fun. Meanwhile, I was heavily securing here and getting ready to help with the assault on the central island again, but hey, guess what? Who shows up? That's right, old General Winter arrives and decides to pretty much slow down the entire pace of the game, which is pretty much what the effect that it has. You're busily trying to light bonfires and make sure all the infantry are either in cover or at a bonfire, because otherwise things are gonna go south pretty quick. You definitely don't want to be losing infantry pointlessly to bad weather. Meanwhile, our allies were doing a decent job. They had finally pressured the defenses enough that they managed to take the fuel point and kick the enemy back across the river, which was very handy. Again, the Germans were trying to build up. They had put up a lot of defenses here. And they, interestingly enough, they were using the half-track with the infrared searchlight, which is very nice. I had not seen people use that before. But yeah, it has a 60-centimeter infrared spotlight that will basically create a red haze, like whenever it scans an area. You can see it going back and forth like that. So you'll be able to see where the enemies are. And so he was then using a unit that goes very well with it, the 7.5-centimeter infantry sport gun, to rain in shells on anything it would find, which I found pretty clever. Meanwhile, I had moved my support infantry over to near a bonfire, and I knew the infantry was over in the victory cap point. Of course they were. You know, what other place would they be? You know, it was pretty safe to assume, and so I was constantly bombarding them through the blizzard, just making sure they were constantly moving around. Meanwhile, I was doing much the same now with my mortar half-track, coming in from another angle completely, and bombarding the west side of the sector. Now you can see what we're really doing right now, even though it's not enough artillery to actually finish off the squads, we're constantly bleeding away OKW manpower. And the OKW desperately needs manpower, because not only are they 2/3 of a resource income as all the other army factions, but, you know, they're big, scary, heavy tanks. I mean, the Tiger II takes, what, 720 manpower or something? If they're constantly having to reinforce their infantry because, you know, just a few of our artillery units are constantly sniping away at them, you know, it's going to really compromise their ability to bring in their heavier units. Meanwhile, wow, they brought up a whole lot of shock troops here. I don't know what they were thinking with that, considering that there's a whole lot of vehicles over this way, and oh, yep, they're still scanning away. Well, this guy's going to get a good glimpse as to what's going on over there. Sure enough, he probably wishes he had made a bit more artillery finding all those targets. Anyway. So, yeah, during the blizzard, things slowed down. We had held the central victory point. They were trying to move in some infantry quickly. Some of them barely starting to freeze to death. I don't think he really appreciated the fact that we had all these defensive fighting positions in stow, and all of these penal battalions with flamethrowers. Very effective, but this squad got completely ambushed. I think they got wiped out. Yeah, they didn't stand much of a chance. But as soon as we saw that attack was coming in this direction, and that the blizzard was lifting, well, then it was a bad time to be them, because scorched earth in this sector where they ran in meant they couldn't retreat in that direction. And with my fighting position starting to light them up with a machine gun from range, and with this combat engineer squads roasting them and keeping them spotted, you know, they just were not able to do terribly much. Even though they had taken them out, the fire was constant and suppressing, and it gave me yet another target to actually rain down with artillery at. I had known the enemy is actually starting to weaken here in the center because their half-track, which I believe is one of the reinforcing units for the... I believe it's the Wehrmacht, I don't remember exactly. We started immediately moving in and pushing them out of the area, just to make sure they couldn't do very much. And even though they were starting to recap the center victory point, I knew this was kind of a hollow attack, because they hadn't brought up any armor. And if they were really going to be serious about it, they would have. And so at this point, I was thinking, you know, I could have some fun here. I have some spare fuel, so I made a very effective infantry counter, the M8A1 howitzer motor carriage, which does kind of act like mobile infantry, like the Mortar half-track. However, it can be used in melee operations, and as soon as they started trying to move forward, it was just a game of suppressing that entire infantry squad with the 50, and they couldn't do a damn thing about it. And you can see they're starting to try to use some aircraft to try to damage the fighting position, but we were pretty well situated in terms of wearing them down. Unfortunately, I did not spot at the time that the enemy had actually moved the Panzer IV into the island area, and this would actually prove to be a problem later because the M8A1s are not effective as counters against enemy tanks. So our ally was able to recapture the point, again holding strong on the riverbank. You could see they were starting to move Panthers forward to kind of pressure us, not necessarily out of the area across the bridge, but so much just to remove the forces from there, or have to make the defenders kind of on the back foot, not letting them be actively guarding the bridge, which was effective. I mean, this was a very back and forth game, which is what I particularly liked about it. And I like the fact that with the 4v4, this is as kind of a grand a scale as the game is meant to capture. I mean, with 4 different companies fighting along, this is basically you know, battalion warfare, battalion-sized warfare, the whole map considered, which, you know, makes it kind of exciting. It kind of puts the game in a whole new scale, even though you're only controlling a quarter of it. And so I was using the those nasty little M8 howitzers, and the capacity they were, destroying their half-track and making their infantry completely unable to reinforce. But then it was at this point I realized, oh crap, they got a Panzer IV. Run away, folks, run away, because that thing will just completely crush them if they don't escape. Didn't help that they had a stolen Russian anti-tank gun as well. Granted, it was only the 45mm, but I figured, you know, there's no point in being here if we don't have to be. So I was trying to get these guys to retreat, but again, you can see the ice. If you're actually standing still on it, it's harder to get moving again on it. So it's actually a real problem. I think they both ended up getting destroyed by this Panzer IV that jumped them, just because they just don't have the kind of capacity to deal with that kind of a force. And it was at this point, after I had shelled up his infantry a bit, that he decided to do a bit of a counterattack, I think. He moved his infantry forward, and see what that M8 howitzer did? That little troll shot around at it, landed at his feet, blew up the ice, and the Panzer IV sunk right in. Oh, that's why you have to be so careful in how you move your tanks around on the ice. God, it's such a more valuable unit, too. He could have really done some bad stuff with that, but he never had the opportunity, thanks to going figure skating there. And so once he started deploying tanks, I had gotten the picture that we were going to need some heavy anti-tank weapons in reserve. And even though I didn't really want to do this, I started making some M36 Jacksons, a team of them, just in case they started pushing forward too much. Now, other upgrades that you get later on in the American package, you get the M1919 A6 Browning LMG, which you can get at the weapon racks in the headquarters. It lets your riflemen use defensive stance ability, which actually lets them generate suppression at the cost of them not being able to maneuver. So essentially acting like a machine gun squad, which is pretty damn handy. Again, the 1919 being very effective at long range, even better than the BAR because of its rate of fire and the fact that it can shoot for much longer. You can also get time on target artillery barrage, which is an coordinated artillery barrage, meaning that it'll take a little while for it to show up, but once it does, it's a rapid succession bombardment. It's like boom, 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 boom. I mean, any infantry or vehicles in there take a huge amount of damage. It's pretty expensive at 180 munitions, but definitely worth it. And the last thing you get is the M7B1 Priest Howitzer Motor Carriage. This is, from what I can tell, the longest range artillery in the game that the U.S. forces get. And it has the bonus of being on a Sherman chassis as well, so, you know, it can pretty much travel at a vehicle's pace as needed, which makes it very handy. Now, as at this point, it became a huge infantry battle over the center. Now, the Germans, they want to keep this fight at a distance. I mean, they've got Obersoldaten, they've got some Volksgrenadiers, the shock troopers are realizing that, you know, with their SMGs, they're not going to do that well at range, so they decided to throw up some smoke. Now, that makes the fight even more interesting, because now the Germans have to move it to close range, and, you know, the shock troopers, they're probably, I think, in my opinion, the best close-range anti-infantry in the game. I mean, you can see them just cutting these German forces down. I mean, just completely butchering them with the sheer rate of fire of their PPSH-41 submachine guns. And they just... And plus, they have body armor, too. That's actually part of what gives their units so much health, is these units actually had equipped steel body armor, which was able to either stop or deflect pistol rounds from 9mm pistols and submachine guns, which is pretty effective when your troops can take can absorb at least some of the shots from the enemy forces. That's a major advantage. Now, the reason I had put these M36 Jacksons here is not because I wanted to attack with them, because we had taken these 2 victory points, but because I knew that they were going to bring forward the heavy tanks eventually, and I was just waiting for an opportunity in order to counterattack with them. Now, I did see up here that they had brought in a couple of Panthers to try to start poking at the northern victory point, but I figured with the air support that our guys were calling in and the anti-tank guns, the ZIS-3s they had deployed in the area, that they would probably be able to hold out, and it was not something I really had to worry much about. They were also calling up KV-8 flamethrower tanks, very effective. And you could see, in terms of the victory point totals at the top, that we were starting to turn the tide here. However, I noticed at this point, when they really started moving forward, that they had brought in yet another Panther, and so they were really deciding to make a concerted attack here against our lines. And so once we had established defenses on the island and around the victory point, and I had managed to consolidate my artillery forces and call in yet more rear echelon troopers to make up more fighting positions, I was figuring, you know, it might be a good idea to actually call forward our M36 Jacksons and take care of any armored problems we're running into. And it was at this point that these trolls were busy shooting down my firing positions, which I took quite sourly. And it was quite convenient, really, for me, though, that this Panzer IV had showed up, because I had 2 fantastic counters for it coming right up along the side. And sure enough, our enemy had well become aware of the Panther attack and had counterflanked with some T-36s, and managed to do quite a bit of damage initially. Unfortunately, I think this one managed to get destroyed because he got flanked as well. Again, so many flanks and counterflanks. Oh, does he ram? Oh, he wasn't able to get close enough to ram. That's a shame. Alright, so I had wheeled up one of my M1 57mm guns, and I desperately wanted to get my Jacksons off of that ice as quickly as possible. So I was trying to maneuver them onto the island at the same time while firing and shooting it as well, because I wanted to get that tank out of there. I didn't want them to get any kind of a momentum. Meanwhile, I was busily reinforcing my rear echelon troops and using my Major and my M21 half-track to keep this area bombarded quite strongly. Unfortunately, our enemy got wise to it, and they decided to flank with some Volksgrenadiers with some Panzerschrecks. So even though they'd lost their Panzer IV, it was going to come at a cost, because they managed to get behind it and shoot quite a bit of nastiness into its rear sector. And I don't think this Jackson actually survived the encounter. Not that I recall, anyway. Or did it? I know I tried to retreat it, but I'm not sure just how far it managed to get. I also brought back my other Jackson, because I was concerned. Now, these infantry have to be careful, because if these tanks keep shooting at their position, it's quite possible they'll break the ice underneath their feet, and they all get to take a swim. Considering how cold this water is, it was not going to be favorable for anyone for them to be doing that. So yeah, I was busily trying to wheel my forces back as quickly as I could, and eventually, I believe, yeah, he gave up on the attack. He didn't want to send his infantry too far into my sector, and I was starting to call in fire from my mortar half-track. So even though they controlled the northern island again, they had done so at considerable cost. And my Russian ally was bringing up his ZSU M17, which has 4 50 caliber machine guns on it, so all those infantry are getting suppressed and killed, even if they are in cover just from the sheer rate of fire of the thing. And even though they had temporarily retaken the victory point in the middle, it was going to quickly be taken again. Now, they started getting smart and bringing up their Pak 50 anti-tank guns, which I figured they would do eventually. I had, meanwhile, set the rear echelon troopers back and had them set up a fighting position over here in case they tried to come from this sector again. Meanwhile, our allies were busily recapturing that victory point. This one, of course, being held pretty stable for the time being, while the enemy was building up a very sizable tank force and pretty much determining where they were going to deploy it. So, what I was wondering at this point is, along with my Russian ally here, is how much had they reinforced the central island once they had retaken it. And it turns out they really hadn't done terribly much, which I found it really trite odd, but fine by me. I was basically just calling rear echelon troopers back here to fix my Jacksons and make sure they were good to go for when the next big tank battle started, which, as you can see, didn't take too much time. He brought in another Panzer IV, and at the same time, they started putting pressure forward on us, bringing in Panthers, attacking in the riverbed along the north, which again is a bit risky because there's no easy way up onto the shore from there. They'd have to either go back up along the bridge on their side or drive south along the river to get to our bank. So the Germans were taking quite a few risks here, which I thought were particularly unwise. As you can see, I brought my priest forward, and I was pretty much just looking for a target. And once I noticed that they were really starting to really concentrate their forces around the victory point, I decided it was time to call in a bombardment very shortly. And sure enough, the Tiger II makes its lovely appearance. Oh, infantry, one of my allies calling down the, let's see, the napalm bombardment on this area, so all those infantry are just getting burned up. You know, there's nothing they really can do. That fuel point's getting deoccupied. Ooh, I didn't know this happened. Okay, apparently they had an IS-2 versus a Tiger B matchup. Alright, looks like they're both kind of struggling to get through their front armor. Looks like the IS-2 got in a good hit and kind of stunned the crew. You also have an ST-3476. Oh, he won't be able to do crap all to the front. It looks like when the IS-2 is hitting the German Tiger II, it looks like it's shocking the crew, which kind of delays their capabilities for a few seconds. From what I'm aware, they have a pretty similar armor portfolio and fuel costs, so I imagine they're both pretty competitive. I think the Tiger could probably win at range, but yeah, I think the T-34 at this point is just, you know, scratching that thing's paint, not really doing any meaningful damage. As you can see, the crew shock again. It looks like that 122mm gun, just by the sheer force of impact, is ending up doing a lot of damage to that Tiger II. Unfortunately, the T-34 buys it, which unfortunately is not really all that surprising. Meanwhile, he crawled in his stern pioneers to do some in-combat repairs. Man, how many people would you get to volunteer to fix your tank while it's actively being shot at? Apparently these guys. Sure enough, they're bringing in some Tiger 1s now, too, just to add insult to injury, and it looks like the battle was really kind of developing here in the north. Meanwhile, the KV-8s and the KV-1s were definitely going to do whatever they needed to do to take over the central victory point, so they were about to move in, as well as that sector as well. Now here I was rebuilding my forces, getting my infantry squared away, launching artillery strikes when needed, and just thinking, you know, how can I best contribute here? Are the Germans really going to commit to a decent attack at this point, or are they just baiting? And it was at this point I realized, okay, yeah, this is where they're actually deciding to commit. So I was doing a quick repair on my Jacksons while my teammate busily reoccupied the central points. And sure enough, they were starting to call in Aleutian airstrikes, trying to defend the attack. Pretty much all the famous tanks were there now. The Tiger 1, the Panther, and the Tiger 2, all pushing for that northern sector as hard as they could. And goodness knows, they certainly were trying, but as long as we held these central positions, it was not going to go their way. As you can see, with the maps that are getting bigger and bigger in scale, it becomes harder to achieve these wild flanks and breakouts just because most of the sectors on these larger maps are going to be occupied. It's much more difficult to move around without getting noticed, especially when you have to build up a larger force just in case you get attacked by the enemy. Oh, wow! They have a decrewed IS-2. Are the Germans actually going to manage to be able to steal this thing? Yeah! Wow, okay. Apparently they had not paid attention to that. Jeez, are they going to try to repair it where it is, or try to drive it away? It looks like they're trying to drive it away. Oh, they're calling down the napalm barrage! Oh, Stern Pioneers get roasted. But will the IS-2 get away, I wonder? They still have an anti-tank gun over here, but it is kind of obscured by the train tracks. Oh, he's stopping. That's weird. I'm not sure really what they were doing there, but I had already pretty much caught wise to this, as had the rest of the team. And when it looked like they really weren't dedicating any kind of tank forces to capturing the center, I started calling all of my artillery over to the eastern sector and just bombarding anything and everything they were holding in reserve here. So the artillery was just constantly, this constant presence. And really that's how useful the artillery doctrine can be once you're in a larger game, because even if you're not directly in the fight, boom, there's, you know, artillery barrage. Whew, huge infantry casualties, again sapping their manpower even harder than before. I, meanwhile, had built up a pretty sizable force. I was pretty near my population cap just through the sheer amount of artillery forces I had brought up. I was just kind of wondering when to deploy my anti-tank reforces, because they had moved up, but they weren't really attacking the victory point. And with the blizzard coming, I was kind of curious what exactly they were really trying to do here. And it looks like they were finally willing to commit to an attack. However, they waited too long. Not only did my allies manage to bring up 2 KV-1s, but 2 Su-85s as well. And these are definitely credible, even though the KV-1s versus the Tiger ones are kind of, you know, I wouldn't say obsolete, but obsolescent, and would be, you know, at a disadvantage here. With bringing up these Su-85 tank destroyers, just to kind of rub it in, this Tiger is not going to be able to stand up to that much anti-tank fire. And things really started getting hot. We had managed to recapture the central island again. It looks like the enemy had decapped the center point, but that really wasn't a huge concern. I was just kind of using an M20 utility car to scout, while a lot of the big fighting was actually happening over here. Now, I was really kind of hoping I wouldn't have to dedicate my forces to this attack, but once it really started getting out of control, I figured it would be a good idea just to send my utility car to actually capture the center point, considering so little seemed to be going on. I was keeping my artillery steadily bombarding their tank assault, and I think it was maybe a couple minutes later I decided that I needed to commit these Jacksons. Because, I mean, again, as you can see, my Soviet allies have brought forward a lot of armor, and you really don't want to just throw all your armor at one sector of the map as soon as 1 or 2 heavy tanks show up. I mean, because you're just asking for trouble if you do that. Again, the Tiger II strutting its stuff, showing off its incredible armor and firepower, taking out a Su-85 without too much difficulty. And meanwhile, they're busy trying to throw that weight around, moving in on these engineers who have really no real means of attacking it. I think what probably would have been best is for him to maybe use one of his T-34s to try to... Oh, they had actually brought in a second Tiger II. Oh yeah, we knew things were going bad when they started throwing those kinds of forces into the fray. And so it was kind of getting chaotic at this point. However, there's a problem when you're kind of assaulting this sector of the map, is you're wide open for counterattack from the southwest. And sure enough, that's what's coming, not only from me, but also from some of my allies as well, who had pulled their armor in the area. As you can see, these unfortunate KV-1s are just a bit too old to really be a severe menace to the power of the Tiger II. Again, the Tiger IIs are taking damage. They're making their heroic stand, as it were, just trying to get flanking shots on them. He's keeping his anti-tank guns in the back, along with... Oh, wow, he actually made a B4 203mm howitzer. That's a pretty powerful artillery gun. And they were just trying to hold on as best they could. But I kind of knew the jig was up at this point, so I started moving all my mobile units on over here. And my Jacksons, I figured that once they had committed to really kind of trying to encircle this point, that it was a great time to counterattack, because I knew I would catch some of their tanks completely off guard. And sure enough, their Panther tank was caught completely off guard. And it's actually their Panther command tank, no less, which is horrible for them, because this Panther command tank is making all of the other heavy tanks that are in his force fight more effectively, and my Jacksons are just ripping it apart while he was distracted with other infantry. And even though they get like one hit in on my Jackson, we just blow it to smithereens, and then suddenly their offensive is not looking so good. Now, I figured when I sent these Jacksons over here, there's only so much they're going to be able to do against Tiger IIs. Maybe we can take it out if we manage to get a good flank in, so I immediately tried to close the distance as quickly as possible and get in behind it. And by forcing him back in this direction, I was just opening him up to rear fire from his anti-tank guns. And sure enough, they're putting it where the sun doesn't shine, and along with the air support, we managed to crush one of their Tiger heavy tanks. And the other one, you know, they get what's going on here. They realize the counterattack has come, and even though the infantry are still trying to push, I'm like, no, we can get more out of this. So I'm busily trying to chase him down as he's reversing desperately to get out of the field of fire here. And I'm like, no, I'm going to get you, I'm going to get you, but he does some very excellent reversing, kind of moving down this slope down into the southern area, and once the Jackson ran into the other Tiger tank, the Tiger 1, I was like, alright, this is starting to get a bit too ridiculous here. We could do some damage, but I'm not willing to just throw my units away for nothing. I mean, hell, if we can get some rear hits in, we'll take them, but, you know, we don't want to just lose our anti-tank force here in this crazy defense. As you can see, they had actually recaptured the island and were attacking some of my rear reserves with this Panther tank. They don't have very good defenses against that, but I was just so distracted with the micromanagement of stopping this German assault up here that I actually hadn't time to really make that many decisions. But as you can see, even though they've technically captured that victory point and put us at a 2-for-1 disadvantage now, we were inflicting so many losses on their heavy tank reserves that despite them being kind of in a losing position, you know, they used to think, oh, they're making their comeback. No, look what's coming. Even more KV tanks, KV-8s. They're bringing up infantry to reinforce their anti-tank guns. I mean, there's only so much you can do when the Allies start a rebound. And if there's, you know, any side that can rebound fast, it's the Allied side. As you can see, I was using my captain's ability to supervise. This greatly increases the spawn speed of any units in which the building he's supervising. Now, using that supervisability, I had already made another M36 to replace the one I had lost. And sure enough, my priest was still busily shooting at the German forces that were trying to raid against our enemy, throwing fire into the area and making it very unsafe for them to loiter there. Meanwhile, I had brought my M21 very far forward and was just kind of saturation bombing these poor infantry that were desperately trying to hold that center point of the map, but were under a lot of duress for doing so. Considering they were deploying so many heavy tanks, I actually made another Jackson and figured, okay, well, you know, if they're really going to commit to this kind of strategy, we might as well punish them for it. As you can see, his Tiger tank here desperately running from the KV, trying to get away. That KV might be able to finish him off if he gets another shot at that side of rear armor. Oh, no, it doesn't look like he hits. Oh, man, can the KV get the Tiger before he escapes? Go, KV! Oh, just missed. I'm kind of excited to see whether this will actually happen. Yeah! The KV-1 gets the Tiger 1 by the tail. Manages to finish it off. Alright, and meanwhile, our majors continue calling in recon patrols, trying to get a feel for where the German forces are deploying. Our allies pushing in on what few defenders are left on the central island. No real action happening here in the end game, which I found kind of surprising, but that was just how the map was playing out. And the KV steadily rolling forward, putting pressure on the enemy. As you can see, they were starting to work on rebuilding their tank force, but it just wasn't happening fast enough, because once you lose a Tiger tank, a King Tiger tank, I mean, it's painful when you lose units like that. I mean, it really compromises your ability to kind of carry the game when you're playing as the OKW or the Wehrmacht. I mean, you can survive it if you have a good team mixture, but otherwise, oh, it's hell when you do lose it. Now, the KV-8, unfortunately, just has his flamethrower. He doesn't have an anti-tank gun, so he's just going to basically scare the infantry here. While a T-34 drives right up behind him, and the KV-1 continues pressuring him from the front. Meanwhile, we managed to, we're working on getting rid of this very annoying anti-tank crew that managed to emplace itself in this sector of the map. But he was just about ready to get destroyed here. And with the 4 ticker points left, it was pretty much the game. We had managed to recapture the points and push the Germans back, and that resulted in team victory, which was a very sweet thing to see. As you can see, not a base-crushing kind of a game. I mean, with these kinds of choke points involved, and the frozen river being a very unsuitable platform for warfare, I mean, even with a kind of a infantry counter-thrust, as it were, there just was not enough momentum for them to really take back the game. And so, we won in a 4v4 match, and I got to experiment with an artillery doctrine. You know, I still had to make an M36 core for chasing down enemy tanks, which I'd expect I would probably have to do at some point. But it was fun to play with the artillery units. They're great for if you're not as strong a player, if you're more of a support player that doesn't like the constant chaos and maneuver warfare, but rather would just like to stay in the back and shoot artillery at, you know, whoever your crazy flanking allies find. Then it's a good fun to play. But as for a doctrine in and of itself, and like in a 1v2 or in a 1v1 or a 2v2 match, I feel like it's just not as strong because of just all the problems that are involved with that, especially on city maps. I mean, the city here on Rostov, the buildings are fairly small, so it's pretty easy to shoot over top them and hit what you're actually trying to go for. It's kind of spread out. But in places like City 17, where the structures are actually quite tall, it can actually get in your way when you're doing artillery barrages. So, anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll come back with more videos soon. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. What faction, maybe what maps, if any, if you particularly like certain maps. Maybe I'll try to show some of the new maps as well. I do like playing the U.S. forces more than the OKW. I will say that up front. I definitely enjoy that more. But I am, of course, willing to play the OKW and any of the other factions. I could play the Russians or the Wehrmacht as well. Alright, so let me know, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.